Well, I want to thank everybody for staying. I know it's getting late. I'm Sebastian Napoli, one of the co-founders of Energy Edge. I'm sure you've seen us around here. And today I want to talk to you about our journey that we've been on with Barclays U.S., their banking division based out of Wilmington, PA, Wilmington, Delaware, I should say. And we've been on this journey with them for about the last 3 years. And it's been a real journey because when we first started with them, we expressed sort of an enterprise content management vision that we wanted them to execute, and they really liked that vision, and they committed to us to execute that vision. Now, usually what happens is that politics takes over, and that vision either gets stretched out really long or sometimes doesn't even happen. But I'm pleased to really say that they've stuck to it and they've executed on it. And we're going to share the lessons that they've learned and that we've learned, mentoring them and helping them through that process. So I'll give you an overview of the journey itself. Then we'll talk about the challenge of the initial storefront launch, which was the initial site that was launched back in 2012, 2013. And then we'll talk about the next node on the journey, if you will, which was the responsive design project, which we did in 2013, 2014 for them. And now the current node that we're on, which is actually content managing this secure app of the online bank to achieve that true enterprise content management, which that initial vision really tried to put them on. So this is a broad timeline of when we started with them. It was back in 2012. And as I mentioned, that was the original marketing site on 4.x. We recently launched them earlier this year, actually, only a couple months ago, not that long ago, on Magnolia 5.x with the responsive site. And that project is actually continuing a little longer now to get to this third node quickly, which is to expose content to their online banking app, which already exists. Alrighty, so what's the vision really look like? So the vision looks like is that really the ability to content manage via one central console the entire online bank, if you will. So this was phase one, the bank marketing site. The online secure site is phase two, and what the ending result of that will also be is that they will be able to content manage any other app within the organization, because they will have the content services already exposed at that point. Okay, so here are some of the challenges that we faced when we initially launched with them. Is that, in a very large organization like Barclays, you have a very big and strong internal IT team. So the internal IT team said, no, we can do this ourselves. So originally, we were told that our internal IT team was going to take on the project. 2 months before the bank was set to launch, this is the online bank in the U.S. here. The IT team did not have appropriate resources, and they did not feel that they could achieve it. So they would have needed to postpone the launch in order to provide for the storefront or make some alternatives like put the pages in with their overall global site, et cetera, which wasn't ideal for them. So they gave us a call, our partner did, FIS, and said, and they asked us, and they said, would you be able to do this in 2 months? We said, oh, it's Barclays? Sure. So we mobilized the team really quickly. The other challenge was a complex workflow, which they needed. And as a bank, they're really big on compliance and audit, so they wanted something related to that. And they also wanted to integrate to the banking system for rates and fees. All of that in 2 months. So we did solve the issue. We realized quickly that we needed to train their editor staff and get them to understand what Magnolia was. So we quickly undertook that so we could have active participation from them. We created a custom complex workflow and a compliance and audit report, and we connected to the banking engine via the JDBC driver, which was provided to us. So here's what the custom workflow looks like for them. They have legal requirements, of course, as a bank, and they also have product marketing requirements. In the banking industry, there's a lot of strict rules around audits and making sure that you can trace back who did what, where, and when, and that there's actual multiple people taking a look at things besides the typical editor and author, editor and publisher that would come out of the box with a Magnolia implementation without additional effort. So here's a copy of the audit report that we did for them, and we actually reused some of this for VSP because they also wanted it, as Steve mentioned in his presentation. So really what we're doing is we're pulling this out of the logs and formatting it so that it looks nice. But this gives the bank the ability to go back and say, okay, on this time and date, here's who made the change, and here's the comments that they gave to the next person, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a custom module which we built for Magnolia. Okay, so the JDBC driver was really meant to access the data related to rates. So the bank has dynamic rates that change on a regular basis, whenever they decide that they're going to increase or decrease the interest rates for the checking accounts and savings accounts and so on. So what we did is we built the logic within the Magnolia backend components to go ahead and retrieve those rates, and then we pushed them up to the page in order for the user to see them. All right, so that was the end of the initial launch, and it worked out well. We were able to meet the timelines relatively efficiently. It wasn't so much our effort. It wasn't that the project was overwhelming from the point of view of us not being able to work. It was more that the bank had a difficult time making decisions in that amount of time, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of committees and a lot of there was an agency involved also that we had to work with closely, and the designs weren't quite finished, et cetera, et cetera. So those were additional challenges that we faced. So most recently, this year and last part of last year, they ended up changing agencies and engaged with an agency to go ahead and create a responsive design. We worked with them very closely to go ahead and implement that. So it was basically a redesign. And since we were on 4.x before, it was a clean sheet, basically implementation that we did for them. We also was the first time, it was the first time that we actually used a framework on the front end, as opposed to doing it the old traditional way of difficult jQuery libraries and just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And we also, the challenge was also because this was relatively new to us, we had done one responsive site before that, and that was Amex, actually, the American Express Bank. And that was a challenge because that was actually the first one we ever did that was responsive design. We wanted to make sure that we didn't repeat some of the issues that we found with that project, so we wanted to create some best practices around implementing responsive design with Magnolia. So how do we do that? This was Barclays was really the genesis of our UI first approach concept, which Rami went through at the technical level, which I'm going to sort of merge into his talk and at a higher, more business type level here. And then we went ahead and aligned the UI development approach with the Magnolia implementation based on this UI first approach that's we've been talking about. Okay, so what do we mean by UI first approach? I won't belabor this because I think Rami did a terrific job of really talking about it, but it's really this concept of creating an actual functional, fully implemented site in HTML and Java and JavaScript, and then going through and testing that site fully on all the different devices and test cases prior to pushing that into Magnolia then. So we started, what we wanted to actually do was implement the process manually first, and then think about how we could automate that process into a potential tool and so on. So this has been a work in process intellectually for a while here, and we wanted to make sure that we developed the process properly, actually work through it ourselves on a manual basis, and then say, okay, here's what we can do to really make it efficient and take it to the next level, which is what Rami has done. So what did that manual process really look like? And this is a good representation of it. So it basically starts at the requirements or user stories, and for us this works in two ways. It's very rare that we actually a lot of this has to do with an agency, right? This is what an agency would do in terms of gathering requirements and then creating the site. We do have web designers on staff, but we don't pretend to be an agency. So we generally end up partnering with the agency that the client has. And Barclays agency happens to be a group called Haddad & Partners. So we work very closely with them, and our team consulted with them to achieve these steps which are showing here. So basically, the end result of this from our point of view is to make sure that these annotations that come out of this analysis ends up in the final design. Because we want to make what really informs the UI architecture and dev to be compliant to Magnolia is those exercises that Rami showed, like on concept board, where you actually put the PSD onto that concept board or whiteboard, if you will, and then you have that exercise with the analyst from the bank or from the agency, the designer from the agency, and us, and the bank also, and work through, okay, what content is it that you want managed? How can we best structure that so that it gives you future flexibility. So on a particular area or component, we want to make sure that there's three pieces there that in the future is there going to need to be the ability to add three more. If that's the case, then we'll structure that within the HTML so that when it moves over into Magnolia, we can create that in an automated fashion. So it's really the goal here. And what we learned from the original responsive design site is that it's really different than doing a standard site, because there's a whole lot more you have to consider, namely the mobile strategy and all and how that fits into the overall design, and make sure that the agency is considering all of that for the needs that we have related to Magnolia. Because not only have we been learning, but we're finding that these agencies are learning at the same time, right? So there's kind of a mismatch there, and then if it's not caught, then we have to deal with it when the Magnolia implementation actually occurs. So this is really the manual process that we followed before it goes into the automated process later on.
And you said the cycle time for this was about 2 months?
For Barclays, this was the outcome of it later on. We thought back, okay, how did we approach this? And we sort of understood that this would be what we would want to follow. And it was somewhat messy. It didn't really follow this exactly because they were such under a tight timeline. But if you start with it in a clear point of view, I'd say, a month to 2 months should be fine. But it's really driven by the agency and the creative process. What happens is that there's lots of iterations around this because the agency will come in with wireframes initially, right? So you can do an initial analysis of that, and then they'll come in with the actual PSDs and the mobile strategy and so on. So we find that we have to adapt this in many ways to the way that the agency works. So what we try and do is say, okay, this is the optimal process, and we try and map it to what the agency is doing and come up with some kind of a hybrid that actually gives us the results which we're looking for, which are these things here. Did I answer your questions? All right. So, moving on to the last portion of the effort here, and that's really content managing their secure app. Their secure app is built by FIS, which is our financial partner, and it was built about 12 years ago using Struts, and it's still quite good, but it's an older technology, right? So we ended up working closely with the bank's IT team, and the other requirement was that they wanted the full Magnolia functionality, because Barclays is used to the marketing storefront being very nice and easy to change. So they said, well, if you're going to content manage a web client, we want the same experience, right? We said, well, of course. So what we did is we actually ended up working in a triangulated fashion between Barclays, FIS, and us in order to get this achieved. So the way that looks like is sort of like this. So you have the Barclays storefront, which is actually rendered by Magnolia itself, because that's a full Magnolia app. And then we implemented REST services that could be pulled by the Barclays secure app. And we also helped them a bit on how to architect the persistence within their app, because we have some experience in doing that in some of the prior product efforts that we've had in the past that you may have seen demos of in prior years also. So we're pretty familiar with that stuff. But the beauty of this is not implemented yet, but step number 4, which is we haven't really approached with them yet, but they are thinking that eventually they'll want some kind of an iPad app or mobile app or a phone app. So those REST services can be shared by any other app that would call the same REST points in the same manner. So it really sets them up for the future in terms of being able to content manage any additional apps that they may have within the banking ecosystem, if you will. So the way this works, the way we were able to basically give them the same user experience that they have with the marketing storefront is by recreating the secure banking page within Author. But then we take that page and we expose it through the REST service as just a JSON payload. So whenever they call, they get the payload that represents all the content for that page. So once they pull it into their app, then they go ahead and persist that in cache however they want to do it. It's a separate architecture in there that fits the Struts world, if you will. And there's a timer that, whenever you log in, it goes ahead and pulls the content and sees if it's changed, if it's not changed, blah, blah, blah. All those things are taken care of by the app itself. What we did do is, because the REST API kind of tends to give you everything back, we intercepted and created a content schema there that kind of filtered the content based on the particular page rather than giving them, having it so that we didn't need to have them kind of sort through the tree and, what we tried to do is make the app REST call easier to deal with so you don't have quite the length of content coming back, so you have more specific targeted content coming back if you want. That's underway now. That's not live yet. Okay, so what did we learn from all this? We learned that it really helps to define an enterprise CMS vision and a plan with the client at the beginning. And it helps in multiple ways. It allows us to get upper level, CEO level support. It really kind of energizes the team to know that we're on a journey and that eventually this is going to really make a difference to the organization in terms of managing not just one particular app or one particular area, but really the entire enterprise. In this case, the entire online bank from end to end. We also realize as we go through these projects, it's really important to start small. And whenever you can, to go ahead and start with a POC of a particular new initiative and present that to the staff and to the management, because that really builds the relationship, and it also builds the support to get the bigger project executed done, and just becomes an easier way to get approvals and so on. Mentoring and support for the client team is really key, we found, is because Magnolia, while we talk about it really easily, is not very well recognized or understood within the user community. And the more that people understand the value of what this can do for their productivity and how it can enhance their individual workflows and how the marketing team in general can see how it'll help them in the campaign side of things, et cetera, the more excitement there is, the better, the easier it is to get approval to proceed and to get those budgets approved and so on. And really, it never ends, right? It's continuous iterations to try and improve the productivity. There's constant new features coming out in Magnolia, so it's our responsibility to go ahead and present those to the client. And we find that the more often we do that, the more Magnolia stays front and center in their mind, and they can see how they can improve the bank in this case by continuing to implement those new features. And one of the key about an enterprise content system is it really, the more it can be reused, the more value it creates for the enterprise. So, the REST layer is fantastic for that, because typically in the bank, you're always reusing the same data, right? It's customers, accounts, and details around those couple of things there. So any application that uses those and can also take advantage of content management, then you've really made a large difference within the enterprise itself. And always measure that progress, right? That's the hard part, is a lot of times, things get implemented, but nobody really knows if this really made a difference or not. So what we're finding is that, we need to go in there and say, hey, look what a difference it made by you implementing Magnolia in this particular area. And that builds recognition, that builds excitement for that next step or that next project. All right, so that's on short order. That's it. So I kept it pretty high level because what I wanted to do is sort of give you an understanding of how we're trying to really solve the enterprise question and how we approach our clients. And in particular, Barclays, we're really happy to see that they've kind of taken that enterprise, that vision, that enterprise vision around content management and have executed it. We're hoping that everybody else does with us too.